The restaurant smelled like money and lies. Tsukiji Omakase didn't have a sign on the door. You either knew where it was or you didn't belong there. The entrance was a narrow corridor painted in charcoal gray with a single paper lantern casting amber light on the polished concrete floor. Robert walked ahead of me, his hand never reaching back to guide me, his Italian loafers clicking with the confidence of a man who thought he owned the world. I followed 3 steps behind, the way I'd learned to do over 35 years of marriage. Close enough to be present, far enough to be invisible. "Elena, keep up," Robert said without turning around, his voice carrying that edge of impatience he reserved exclusively for me. "Tanaka-san doesn't like to be kept waiting." I smoothed the front of my navy Armani dress, the one Robert had picked out because he said it made me look elegant but not distracting, and quickened my pace. My heels were silent on the floor. I'd learned to walk quietly, too. The hostess, a young woman in a crisp white uniform, bowed deeply. "Ashford-sama, welcome. Your table is ready." Robert didn't acknowledge her. He was already scanning the room for Hiroshi Tanaka, the Japanese investor who represented the deal Robert had been chasing for 8 months. This contract would unlock a $50 million capital infusion into Robert's venture fund. He'd talked about nothing else for weeks. What he didn't know was that I'd already spoken to Mr. Tanaka. But not yet. Not tonight. Tonight I was still playing the role I'd perfected, the dutiful wife, the porcelain doll, the woman who smiled and nodded and never ever caused a scene. The private dining room was exquisite. Sliding shoji screens separated us from the rest of the restaurant. A low black lacquer table gleamed in the center, surrounded by silk cushions. The faint scent of hinoki wood mixed with the sharper notes of fresh wasabi and pickled ginger. A small alcove held a single ikebana arrangement, 3 white chrysanthemums in stark, perfect asymmetry. My mother would have loved this place. She'd spent 2 years in Osaka as a young woman, before she married my father. She'd taught me to appreciate the discipline of Japanese aesthetics. Nothing wasted, nothing excessive, everything intentional. Robert had never asked about my mother. He'd never asked about my childhood in Kyoto either. On our 3rd date, I'd mentioned that my father had been a diplomat, that I'd lived in Japan for 10 years. Robert had nodded, said that's nice, and then spent the next hour talking about his Harvard rowing team. I'd stopped offering pieces of myself after that. "Elena, sit there," Robert said, pointing to the cushion farthest from the head of the table, the least important seat. "Vanessa will sit next to me to take notes." Vanessa Chen appeared in the doorway like she'd been summoned by magic. 28 years old, with glossy black hair that fell in a perfect sheet down her back, wearing a cream silk blouse that probably cost more than my first car. She carried a leather portfolio and an iPad, the tools of her trade as Robert's indispensable executive assistant. I knew about the apartment in Tribeca, the one Robert paid for. I'd known since April when I found the lease receipt tucked into his coat pocket, the one he'd forgotten to move before sending the suit to the cleaners. 6 months. I'd known for 6 months. "Mrs. Ashford," Vanessa said, her smile bright and empty. "You look lovely tonight." "Thank you, Vanessa," I replied, lowering myself onto the cushion with practiced grace. "You're very kind." Robert didn't look at me. He was checking his phone, his jaw tight with anticipation. The shoji screen slid open, and Hiroshi Tanaka entered with his associate, a younger man named Kenji Sato. Both men wore impeccable dark suits. Mr. Tanaka's silver hair was trimmed with military precision. He had the quiet authority of someone who'd built empires without ever raising his voice. "Ashford-san," Mr. Tanaka said, bowing slightly. Robert stood, extending his hand for a Western-style handshake, always asserting dominance, even in small gestures. "Tanaka-san, thank you for making time tonight. I know you're only in New York for 48 hours. They settled into their seats. A waitress appeared with warm oshibori towels, then sake in delicate ceramic cups. The first course arrived: ankamo, monkfish liver, smooth as butter, garnished with microgreens and a ponzu reduction that tasted like the ocean. I ate slowly, carefully, every movement measured. Robert launched into his pitch, talking about market opportunities, projected returns, synergies between his portfolio companies and Tanaka's Tokyo-based holdings. Vanessa nodded along, occasionally tapping notes on her iPad. Mr. Tanaka listened with the patience of a man who'd heard 1,000 pitches. Then Robert switched to Japanese. I felt the shift like a door closing. He leaned toward Vanessa, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial register, and said in smooth, textbook Japanese, "Tanaka-san is almost convinced. After dinner, we'll close this in the lounge." Vanessa giggled, responding in Mandarin-accented Japanese. "You're so good at this, Robert. He has no idea you've already moved the funds." My hand tightened around my sake cup. Robert smirked. He turned slightly toward me, as if I were part of the furniture, and continued in Japanese. "Look at her, sitting there like a porcelain doll, smiling, silent, useless." The room tilted. My heart slammed against my ribs, but my face remained serene. I took a sip of sake. The liquid burned down my throat. Robert kept talking. "Little does she know the divorce papers are already drawn. Gregory finished them last week. As soon as Tanaka signs the contract tomorrow, I'm transferring the estate to your name, Vanessa. Elena will be in that one-bedroom apartment in Murray Hill by the end of the month." Vanessa's eyes widened with delight. "Really? The whole estate?" "She won't fight it," Robert said, his voice dripping with contempt. "She's too weak, too dependent. She wouldn't even know where to start." I set down my sake cup with a soft click. Inside, I was screaming. Inside, I was burning. But outside, I smiled gently and reached for a piece of sashimi with my chopsticks. The tuna was perfect, deep red, silky, cut with precision. My father's voice echoed in my memory. I was 12, sitting in our Kyoto garden, watching him prepare for a difficult negotiation. "Elena," he'd said, "the most powerful weapon is the one your enemy doesn't see. Let them talk. Let them reveal themselves, and when the time is right, strike with precision." I'd lived in Kyoto from age 8 to 18. I'd attended an international school where half my classes were in Japanese. I'd studied tea ceremony with Tanaka-sensei, a woman who taught me that grace and strength were not opposites. I'd spent weekends at my best friend Yuki's house, speaking nothing but Japanese, laughing in a language that felt like home. Robert had never asked. In 35 years, he'd never once asked if I spoke Japanese. I took another sip of tea and smiled. Let him talk. Before we continue the story, leave a like and comment your age and where you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story has reached. I woke to cold sheets and silence. Robert's side of the bed was untouched, the duvet still tucked in with military precision the way the housekeeper, Luce, left it every morning. He'd texted around midnight. "Working late. Don't wait up." Which meant he was at Vanessa's apartment, the one with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson, the one he thought I didn't know about. I lay still for a moment, watching dawnlight creep through the curtains. The bedroom was on the 4th floor of our brownstone, my childhood bedroom, the one I'd slept in from age 18 until I married Robert and foolishly invited him into my family's home. Our home, except it had never been ours. I rose and wrapped myself in a silk robe, the fabric whispering against my skin. My bare feet touched the cool hardwood floors, original 1920s oak, restored by my father in 1987. Every floorboard in this house had a memory. The 3rd step on the main staircase creaked, the library door stuck in humid weather. The kitchen window overlooked a small garden where my mother had grown herbs until the cancer took her in 2001. Robert had wanted to sell this house a dozen times. "It's too old-fashioned," he'd say. "We should get something modern in the West Village." But he couldn't sell it because he didn't own it. I walked downstairs, through rooms filled with furniture Robert had chosen, cold, minimalist pieces in gray and chrome that clashed with the warmth of the original architecture. My mother's antique side tables had been relegated to the basement. My father's bookshelves, packed with diplomatic histories and Japanese literature, had been reorganized into sterile matching sets Robert ordered from an interior designer. I'd let him do it. I'd smiled and nodded while he erased my family's presence, room by room. But I'd kept one space untouched, my father's study. It was on the second floor, a small room with green walls and built-in mahogany bookshelves. Robert never went in there. He said it was creepy to keep a dead man's office preserved like a shrine. I'd locked the door years ago and kept the only key on a chain around my neck, hidden beneath my clothes. I unlocked it now. The room smelled like old leather and pipe tobacco, even though my father had been gone for 29 years. His desk sat in front of the window, the surface still holding his brass lamp, his fountain pen, a framed photograph of my mother in Kyoto, standing beneath cherry blossoms. I sat in his chair and opened the bottom drawer. Inside was a folder, plain manila, unremarkable. But inside that folder was the architectural blueprint of Robert's destruction. It had started on April 14th. I remembered the date because it was our 35th wedding anniversary. Robert had forgotten, of course. He'd come home at 10 p.m., smelling of wine and Vanessa's perfume, something young and sweet, probably purchased at Sephora, nothing like the Chanel No. 5 I'd worn for decades. He'd tossed his coat on the bench in the foyer, gone upstairs without a word. The next morning, Luce had found the coat and brought it to me before taking it to the cleaners. "Mrs. Ashford, there's something in the pocket," she'd said, her dark eyes worried. The receipt was printed on thin paper, already fading. Murray Hill Residential Leasing, 1-bedroom apartment, leaseholder, Robert Ashford, monthly rent $3,800, lease start date, May 1st. I'd stood in the kitchen, holding that receipt, feeling the floor drop out from under me. Luce had touched my arm gently. "I'm sorry, Senora." I'd folded the receipt carefully and slipped it into my pocket. "It's all right, Luce. Could you bring me some tea?" She'd left, shaking her head. I'd sat at the kitchen table for 2 hours, staring at the garden, watching sparrows fight over seeds in the bird feeder. And then I'd made a phone call. Miranda Frost's office. "This is Elena Ashford. I need to schedule a consultation. Family law." Miranda had been direct, mid-50s, sharp gray suit, zero patience for self-pity. Her office in Midtown had walls lined with diplomas and case victories. She'd reviewed my situation in under 10 minutes. "How long have you suspected infidelity?" "I've known for certain since this morning." "Assets?" "The brownstone is mine, held in an irrevocable trust my father established in 1995. Robert's venture capital firm is separate. I have no stake in it, according to him." Miranda had looked up sharply. "According to him?" "I helped him build it, my father's contacts, my connections to European and Asian investors in the early days. But my name was never on any documents." "That's recoverable, what else?" "I think he's planning to divorce me. Leave me with nothing." Miranda had leaned back in her chair, steepling her fingers. "Then we need to move faster than he does. I'll need you to do something difficult, Elena. I'll need you to pretend everything is fine while we build the case. Can you do that?" I'd thought of my father, his diplomatic smile, his ability to negotiate peace treaties while wars raged around him. "Yes," I'd said, "I can do that." Over the next 6 months, I'd become a spy in my own life. Miranda had connected me with James Corwin, a private investigator who looked like someone's kindly grandfather but had a forensic mind like a steel trap. He'd documented everything: Vanessa's apartment, Robert's overnight stays, the restaurants where they held hands in public, thinking they were invisible. Then came Dr. Rachel Huang, the forensic accountant. She was a tiny woman with wire-rimmed glasses and the tenacity of a bloodhound. She'd found the offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands. She'd traced the $3 million Robert had siphoned from investor funds, including money meant for Hiroshi Tanaka's portfolio. "He's been doing this for years," Rachel had told me, her voice clinical. "Small amounts moved carefully, but it adds up. This is embezzlement, Elena. Federal crime territory. I'd also found the emails. Robert had gotten sloppy, leaving his laptop open one Sunday morning while he showered. I'd photographed everything with my phone. Messages between him and Gregory Pike discussing the divorce timeline, the plan to claim the house was marital property, the strategy to paint me as financially incompetent so I wouldn't fight the settlement. She won't even understand the paperwork, Robert had written. Elena's never worked a day in her life. She'll sign whatever we put in front of her. My hands had shaken so badly I'd almost dropped the phone, but I'd kept breathing, kept smiling, kept playing the part. Now, sitting in my father's study, I opened the folder and reviewed everything one last time. Bank statements showing the offshore transfers, emails with timestamps, photographs of Robert and Vanessa entering her building. The lease for the Murray Hill apartment, the one he'd planned to send me to. And the centerpiece, a formal letter I'd written 3 weeks ago to Hiroshi Tanaka's firm in Tokyo, sent through my father's former colleague at the Japanese embassy. In the letter, written in flawless business Japanese, Keigo, I'd introduced myself as Ambassador Castellano's daughter. I'd explained that Robert Ashford had been misappropriating funds intended for Tanaka's investment portfolio. I'd provided documentation, and I'd requested a private meeting before any contracts were signed. Mr. Tanaka had responded within 48 hours. The meeting was set for tonight. My phone buzzed. Robert's name appeared on the screen. Dinner at 7. Wear the navy dress. And Elena, try to look pleasant. This is important. I typed back, "Of course, I'll be ready." I set the phone down and looked at my reflection in the window. The morning light caught the silver in my hair, the fine lines around my eyes. 60 years old, 35 years of marriage, a lifetime of silence. Not anymore. I stood and walked to my closet. The navy Armani dress hung in the front, exactly where Robert expected it to be. But behind it, tucked in a garment bag, was something else. A deep crimson dress I'd bought last week. Red for courage, red for war. Tonight, I would wear navy. I would play the porcelain doll one last time. But tomorrow, I would burn his world down. I applied my lipstick with the precision of a surgeon. Chanel Rouge Allure in Pirate, a shade I'd worn for 20 years, because Robert once said it made me look refined. I pressed my lips together, studying my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me had perfect posture, understated jewelry, hair pulled into a classic chignon. She looked like she belonged in a museum. Beautiful, breakable, behind glass. But museums also held weapons, samurai swords, armor, artifacts from wars won and lost. I touched the pearl earrings my mother had given me, the ones she'd worn when she accompanied my father to state dinners in Tokyo, Vienna, Geneva. She'd taught me that diplomacy was an art form, that power didn't always announce itself with raised voices. Silence, she'd told me once, is not the same as surrender. I heard the front door slam. Robert's footsteps echoed through the foyer, heavy, impatient, already annoyed before he'd even seen me. "Elena," he shouted up the stairs, "I need to change. We leave in 30 minutes. I didn't respond. I smoothed the front of my navy dress, checked my reflection one final time, and descended the staircase slowly, each step deliberate. Robert was in the living room, loosening his tie, scrolling through his phone. He didn't look up when I entered. "I laid out your gray Tom Ford suit," I said quietly. "The one you wore to the Goldman Sachs dinner. I know which suit to wear, Elena. I don't need you playing dress-up assistant." He finally glanced at me, his eyes scanning me with the enthusiasm of someone inspecting a piece of furniture. "That dress is fine. Just don't talk too much tonight. Tanaka is traditional. He won't expect you to contribute to the conversation anyway." Something cold settled in my chest. Not anger, colder than that. "Of course," I said. "I understand." He was already walking toward the stairs. "I'll be down in 20 minutes. Try not to wrinkle that dress before we leave." I stood alone in the living room, listening to his footsteps fade above me. The afternoon light slanted through the windows, casting long shadows across the floor. This house had watched me shrink for 35 years. watched me make myself smaller, quieter, less. Not tonight. I walked to the bar cart and poured myself a small glass of whiskey, Yamazaki 18, a bottle my father had opened the night I got accepted to Columbia. Robert had never touched it. He said Japanese whiskey was overrated. I raised the glass toward my father's portrait on the wall. "Kampai, Papa," I whispered. "Watch what your daughter does tonight." The whiskey burned perfectly. 2 weeks ago, I'd met Hiroshi Tanaka at a tea house in Midtown. Not the trendy kind with Edison bulbs and reclaimed wood. This was Urasenka Tea House, tucked on a quiet side street near the UN building. You needed a referral to even know it existed. My father had been a member. After his death, my mother had maintained the membership. And when she passed, I'd kept it. A small act of preservation Robert knew nothing about. I'd arrived early, wearing a simple black dress, my hair down. The tea master, Kimura-san, had greeted me with a bow. "Castellano-san no Ojo-sama," she'd said, Ambassador Castellano's daughter. "It has been too long. I apologize for my absence, Kimura-san." She'd led me to a private room where Hiroshi Tanaka waited, seated formally on a zabuton cushion. He'd risen and bowed when I entered. "Castellano-sama," he'd said, using my family name. "Your father was a great man. I had the honor of working with him during the trade negotiations in 1989. I'd bowed in return. "The honor is mine, Tanaka-san. Thank you for agreeing to meet." We'd observed the tea ceremony in silence, the ritual cleansing of utensils, the precise whisking of matcha, the careful presentation of wagashi sweets. Only after the tea was served did we speak of business. I'd placed a folder on the table between us. "I apologize for the unusual circumstances of this meeting. What I'm about to share concerns your potential investment in my husband's firm." Tanaka-san had opened the folder. His expression hadn't changed as he reviewed the documents, the offshore account statements, the wire transfers, the emails between Robert and Gregory Pike discussing how to hide the diverted funds. "Your husband," he'd said finally in Japanese, "has stolen $3 million from the preliminary capital I provided for due diligence. Yes, and he believes I am unaware. He believes many things that are untrue, Tanaka-san." A ghost of a smile had crossed his face. "You speak our language beautifully. Where did you study?" "Kyoto. I attended the international school for 10 years. My father was posted there when I was a child." He'd nodded slowly, closing the folder. "Your husband does not know this?" "He has never asked." "Ah." Tanaka-san had set down his teacup with great care. "Then he is not only a thief, he is a fool." I'd felt something crack open inside me. Relief. Validation. The simple acknowledgement that I was not crazy, not paranoid, not the hysterical wife Robert would surely paint me as if I confronted him privately. "I have a proposal, Tanaka-san," I'd said. "My husband has arranged a dinner for tomorrow evening at Tsukiji Omakase. He plans to finalize the investment contract with you. I believe he will reveal himself if given the opportunity. You wish to expose him publicly. I wish for him to expose himself. There is a difference." Tanaka-san had studied me for a long moment. Then he'd bowed his head slightly. "Your father taught you well. What do you need from me?" "Patience, and perhaps a small performance of your own." We'd spent the next hour planning. Tanaka-san would arrive at the dinner as expected, bringing his associate Kenji Sato. He would listen to Robert's pitch. He would appear interested but non-committal. And when the moment came, when Robert revealed enough of his arrogance, his contempt, his crimes, Tanaka-san would give me a signal, a simple glance, nothing more. And I would strike. Now, sitting in the back of the town car Robert had hired for the evening, I watched the city blur past. Robert sat beside me, typing furiously on his phone, his jaw tight with concentration. He'd been on calls all afternoon. Gregory, Marcus, someone at the bank. "This Tanaka deal is critical," he muttered, not looking at me. If we close this, the firm triples in valuation by Q2. We'll be in the top tier. That's wonderful, Robert, I said softly. He finally glanced at me. Just remember, you're there to smile and look appropriate. Don't try to participate in conversations above your understanding. I folded my hands in my lap. I understand my role. Good. He returned to his phone. The car pulled up to Tsukiji Omakase. The valet opened my door, and I stepped onto the sidewalk, the cool October air brushing my skin. The restaurant's entrance glowed with that single amber lantern, mysterious and exclusive. Vanessa was already inside. I could see her through the window, arranging papers on the table, her cream silk blouse catching the light. She'd come early with Robert's briefcase, the one containing the fraudulent contracts. Robert placed his hand on the small of my back. Not affection, just proprietary guidance. Remember, silent, pleasant, decorative. Of course, I said. We entered the restaurant. The hostess bowed. The corridor stretched before us, narrow and dim. My heels clicked against the floor, each step bringing me closer to the precipice. The shoji screen to our private room slid open. Vanessa looked up, her smile bright and false. Mr. Ashford, everything is ready. The contracts are... She noticed me and adjusted her tone. Oh, hello, Mrs. Ashford. Hello, Vanessa, I said, taking my assigned seat at the far end of the table. Robert sat at the head, immediately reviewing documents with Vanessa. They spoke in low tones, their heads bent together, utterly dismissive of my presence. I smoothed my dress and waited. 5 minutes passed. Then the shoji screen opened again. Hiroshi Tanaka entered, Kenji Sato behind him. Both men wore impeccable dark suits. Tanaka-san's eyes swept the room, noting Robert's positioning, Vanessa's proximity, the contracts spread on the table, and then his gaze found mine. He bowed slightly, so slightly that Robert, busy standing and extending his hand, didn't notice. But I saw it, the signal, the acknowledgement, the silent declaration, I am ready. Are you? I lowered my eyes and reached for my water glass, the picture of demure compliance. Inside, I was a blade being sharpened. Let the performance begin. The kaiseki courses arrived like acts in a play. First, the zensai, tiny appetizers arranged on a black slate plate, pickled chrysanthemum petals, smoked duck with yuzu, a single ginkgo nut, golden and perfect. Robert ate without tasting, his attention fixed on Mr. Tanaka, performing his rehearsed charm. The Asian market is undervalued right now, Robert said, gesturing with his sake cup. Especially in the tech sector. My firm has identified 3 emerging companies in Seoul and Tokyo that are poised for exponential growth. With your capital injection, we can position ourselves ahead of the curve, Mr. Tanaka nodded thoughtfully, his expression revealing nothing. And your track record in Asian markets? Exceptional, Robert said without hesitation. We've delivered consistent returns across all sectors. I have the performance data here. He gestured to Vanessa, who immediately opened the portfolio and slid a bound report across the table. I watched her manicured fingers, the diamond bracelet on her wrist, Cartier, probably a gift from Robert. She caught me looking and smiled, that same bright, empty smile she always gave me. As if I were a child who wouldn't understand the adult conversation happening around me. The second course arrived. Owen, a delicate clear soup with matsutake mushrooms and a single prawn. The broth smelled like autumn forests, earthy and clean. Robert tasted it and set it aside, already talking again. Kenji-san, your background is in semiconductor manufacturing, correct? I'd love to discuss how our portfolio companies could integrate with your supply chain. Kenji Sato, Tanaka's associate, responded carefully in English. That would depend on the specific companies and their production standards. Robert nodded, his confidence building. He'd had 3 cups of sake now, and the alcohol was loosening his tongue. Of course. Due diligence is critical. That's why I've prepared comprehensive documentation for your review. Vanessa passed another folder to Kenji-san. Her blouse had slipped slightly off her shoulder. She adjusted it with a small, practiced gesture, and I saw Robert's eyes follow the movement. 35 years. I'd watched him look at other women for 35 years. The third course, otsukuri. The sashimi course, bluefin tuna, fluke, sea bream arranged like an art installation. The fish gleamed under the soft lighting, each slice translucent and perfect. Robert picked up his chopsticks and turned to Vanessa. Then, with the casualness of someone certain he was safe, he switched to Japanese. "Tanaka-san likes the numbers," he said, his Japanese smooth but textbook, lacking nuance. "He'll want to review everything overnight, but I can tell he's interested. We'll have the contract signed by tomorrow afternoon." Vanessa responded in her Mandarin-accented Japanese. "You're brilliant, Robert. This is going to change everything for us." Us. The word hung in the air between them. Robert smiled and reached for the sake bottle, refilling both their cups. Then he glanced at me, sitting silent at the end of the table, my hands folded in my lap, and said in Japanese, "Look at her, so obedient, so decorative, like a doll you put on a shelf and forget about." My heart hammered against my ribs, but my face remained serene. I reached for a piece of tuna with my chopsticks, dipped it lightly in soy sauce, and placed it in my mouth. The fish dissolved on my tongue, buttery and rich. Vanessa giggled. "Does she even know what we're saying?" "Elena," Robert snorted softly. "She barely speaks Spanish, and we have a Mexican housekeeper. She's certainly not going to understand Japanese. The woman has never been curious about anything beyond her garden club and her charity luncheons." I set down my chopsticks with a soft click. Mr. Tanaka was watching me. His expression hadn't changed, but there was something in his eyes. A question, perhaps, or a warning, Robert continued, emboldened by sake and arrogance. "The best part is, she has no idea what's coming. Gregory has the divorce papers ready. The moment you sign the investment contract, I'm transferring the brownstone deed to Vanessa's name." Vanessa's eyes widened. "The whole house?" "It's worth $12 million, Robert said, leaning back with satisfaction. "Elena thinks it's hers because her father bought it, but I had Gregory research the deed structure. It's been marital property for decades. She just never bothered to check. A lie, a complete arrogant lie, but I said nothing. I took another sip of tea, the ceramic cup warm against my palms. Robert warmed to his subject, his voice dropping lower, more intimate. "I've already rented her an apartment in Murray Hill. 1 bedroom, 6th floor walk-up. It's what she deserves after all these years of uselessness. She's never worked, never contributed, never even tried to understand my business." "When will you tell her?" Vanessa asked. "I won't. Gregory will serve her the papers while I'm on our trip to Bali." Robert smiled. "By the time we get back, she'll be out of the house, and we can start our real life together." Vanessa touched his hand on the table. A brief gesture, but possessive. I thought of my mother. She'd been standing in almost this exact position when she was diagnosed, sitting at a doctor's office, receiving news that would end her life, and she'd remained composed, graceful. She'd thanked the oncologist, scheduled her first treatment, and walked out into the Manhattan sunshine with her head high. Later, at home, she'd let herself cry, but never in public, never where it could be used against her. "Strength," she'd told me, "is not the absence of pain, Elena. It's the refusal to let pain make you small." The 4th course arrived, yakimono, grilled black cod glazed with miso. The fish was caramelized and fragrant, the flesh tender enough to break apart with chopsticks. Robert had stopped eating entirely. He was fully engaged now, speaking faster, his words tumbling out in a mixture of English and Japanese, no longer caring who heard what. "Marcus helped me bury Elena's early contributions to the firm," he said in Japanese. "We backdated documents, removed her name from the investor introduction records. As far as anyone knows, she was just a pretty face I brought to parties. My brother-in-law, my husband's own brother, complicit." Vanessa shook her head in mock sympathy. "She really has no idea?" "None." Robert picked up his sake cup. Elena is the kind of woman who believes what she's told. She's passive. She's been trained her whole life to be agreeable. Even now, look at her, sitting there, smiling, completely unaware that her entire life is about to implode. He raised his cup toward Mr. Tanaka, to new partnerships and new beginnings. Mr. Tanaka did not raise his cup. Instead, he looked directly at me, and in that moment, I made my choice. I set down my teacup, smoothed the napkin on my lap, and cleared my throat softly. Robert didn't notice. He was still talking to Vanessa, still laughing, still confident in his invisibility. But Mr. Tanaka noticed. Kenji Sato noticed. And somewhere, I imagined, my father noticed. I opened my mouth and let 35 years of silence shatter. I turned to Mr. Tanaka and spoke in Japanese. Not the casual Japanese of friends or colleagues. Formal Japanese. Keigo, the language of diplomacy, business, and respect. The language my father had taught me was a blade wrapped in silk. Tanaka-sama, I began, my voice clear and steady. Before you finalize any agreement with my husband, there is information you should have regarding the management of your investment capital. The room went silent. Robert's head snapped toward me, his sake cup frozen halfway to his lips, his face drained of color. Vanessa's mouth fell open. Kenji Sato leaned forward slightly, his eyes sharp with interest. But Mr. Tanaka simply nodded, his expression unchanged. Please continue, Castellano-san. I kept my eyes on Tanaka, my hands folded calmly in my lap. Over the past 18 months, my husband has diverted $3 million from the preliminary capital you provided for due diligence. These funds were transferred to offshore accounts in the Cayman Islands under shell corporations registered to his lawyer, Gregory Pike. Elena, Robert's voice cracked. He started to stand. Sit down, Robert, I said in English, my tone sharp enough to cut. Then I returned to Japanese, addressing Tanaka. The wire transfer records are documented. The Shell Corporation registration papers list Mr. Pike as the primary officer, but the beneficial owner is my husband. I have provided copies of all documentation to your firm's legal department in Tokyo. Mr. Tanaka's expression shifted, not to anger, but to something colder. Calculation. When did you send this information? 3 weeks ago, through Ambassador Watanabe at the Japanese embassy. He was a colleague of my late father. Ah. Tanaka nodded slowly. I received a communication from Watanabe-san. He spoke highly of Ambassador Castellano's daughter. I now understand why. Robert finally found his voice. This is insane. Elena she can't. He switched to English, his words tumbling over each other. Tanaka-san, my wife is confused. She doesn't understand business. She's never understood. I lived in Kyoto for 10 years, I said, still in Japanese, still addressing Tanaka. I attended the international school. My father was posted there from 1973 to 1983. I studied tea ceremony with Tanaka Michiko-sensei at the Urasenke Foundation. I speak Japanese fluently. Tanaka-sama. I have always spoken Japanese fluently. The silence that followed was absolute. Vanessa made a small, strangled sound. Her hand flew to her mouth. Robert stared at me like he was seeing a ghost. You speak. Yes, Robert. I switched to English now, my voice level and cold. I speak Japanese. I've always spoken Japanese. You never asked. In 35 years of marriage, you never once asked about my childhood, my education, or my languages. You assumed I was decorative and stupid. You were wrong. Mr. Tanaka set down his chopsticks with deliberate precision. Ashford-san, is what Castellano-san says true? Have you misappropriated funds from my investment? No, absolutely not. This is a misunderstanding. Robert turned to me, his eyes wild. Elena, what are you doing? What the hell are you doing? I reached into my small clutch purse and withdrew a slim USB drive. I placed it on the table in front of Mr. Tanaka. This contains bank statements, wire transfer confirmations, email correspondence between Robert and Gregory Pike, and recorded conversations discussing the embezzlement. Everything is time-stamped and authenticated by a forensic accountant. Kenji Sato picked up the USB drive, examining it. There are also, I continued in Japanese, recorded conversations from this evening. My husband discussed his plans to divorce me, transfer marital assets to his mistress, and leave me destitute. All of this was said in Japanese, believing I could not understand. Vanessa pushed back from the table, her chair scraping loudly. We weren't. This is a private matter between. Be quiet, Vanessa, I said without looking at her. Then to Mr. Tanaka, I apologize for the deception, Tanaka-sama. But I needed my husband to reveal himself fully. I needed you to see the kind of man you were about to enter into partnership with. Mr. Tanaka stood slowly. He picked up the contract Robert had prepared, 20 pages of legal documents, bound in leather, and very carefully, very deliberately, tore it in half. The sound echoed in the small room. There will be no partnership, Tanaka said in English, his voice quiet but absolute. There will be no investment. And I will be contacting the Securities and Exchange Commission regarding your business practices, Ashford-san. Robert's face went from white to red. You can't. This is slander. This is my hysterical wife trying to— Your wife, Mr. Tanaka said, his tone sharp as a knife, speaks better Japanese than you do. She understands honor and integrity, which you clearly do not. This meeting is over. He bowed to me, a full, respectful bow. Castellano-san, please give my regards to Ambassador Watanabe. I hope we will meet again under better circumstances. I stood and returned the bow. Thank you, Tanaka-sama. I am deeply grateful for your time and your wisdom. Tanaka and Kenji Sato left without another word, the shoji screen sliding shut behind them. The room felt smaller now, just the three of us, Robert, Vanessa, and me. Robert's hands were shaking. He turned to me, and for the first time in 35 years, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. Elena, listen to me. We can work this out. Whatever you think is happening. I know exactly what's happening, I said. I reached into my purse again and withdrew a folded document. I placed it on the table in front of him. This is a copy of the deed to our brownstone. It's held in an irrevocable trust established by my father in 1995. The trust names me as the sole beneficiary. You have never owned that house, Robert. You have never owned anything that was truly mine. He snatched the document, his eyes scanning frantically. This can't— Gregory said— Gregory lied, or perhaps he simply never checked. The house is mine. It has always been mine. Vanessa stood abruptly. I need to go. She grabbed her purse. Sit down, Vanessa, I said quietly. You're complicit in fraud and embezzlement. If you leave this restaurant, I will call the authorities immediately. She froze. Robert slammed his fist on the table. You can't do this. You can't just— Who do you think you are? I'm Ambassador Vincent Castellano's daughter, I said. I'm the woman who built your company with her family's connections while you took credit. I'm the wife who stayed silent for 35 years while you belittled and betrayed me. And as of 20 minutes ago, I'm the woman who filed a restraining order against you. His face went slack. What? You have 20 minutes to collect your personal items from the brownstone. After that, the locks will be changed. I've rented you an apartment in Murray Hill, 1 bedroom, 6th floor walk-up. The lease is in your name. First month's rent is paid. The words hung in the air between us. Robert's expression shifted from shock to rage to something like desperation. Elena, please, we can talk about this. We've been married for 35 years. You can't just— I can, I said. And I have. I stood, smoothing my dress. I picked up my clutch purse and my coat from the back of my chair. Enjoy your evening, Robert, I said. I believe you have a reservation at this restaurant. I'd hate for it to go to waste. I walked toward the shoji screen. Behind me, I heard Vanessa start to cry. Robert's voice rose, calling my name, but I didn't turn around. I stepped into the corridor, my heels clicking on the polished floor. The hostess looked up, startled. Is everything all right, ma'am? Everything is perfect, I said. Thank you. I walked out into the October night. The air was crisp and cool, carrying the scent of rain. My phone buzzed in my purse. Miranda Frost's name appeared on the screen. It's done, she said when I answered. The restraining order is filed. Court officers standing by at the house. Robert has 20 minutes to collect his belongings, and then he's legally barred from the property. Thank you, Miranda. How did it go? I looked back at the restaurant, at the amber lantern glowing in the darkness. Better than expected, I said. I'll call you tomorrow. I ended the call and raised my hand. A taxi pulled to the curb. Where to? The driver asked. I gave him my address, my real address, the home my father had built, the home that had always been mine. Home, I said. Take me home. 2 weeks later, I stood in my mother's garden and watched the first snow of November fall. The brownstone was quiet. No Robert. No arguments echoing through the hallways. No cold silences that felt like living in a mausoleum. Just the soft hum of the radiators, the occasional creak of old floorboards, and the sound of my own breathing. Peace. I'd forgotten what it felt like. The garden was small, just a narrow strip of earth behind the house, bordered by a brick wall covered in ivy. My mother had planted roses here in the 80s, heirloom varieties with names like Madame Alfred Carrière and Cécile Brunner. They'd gone wild in the years since Robert had forbidden me from wasting time on gardening, but the root systems were still strong. They could be brought back. With patience and care, they could bloom again. I knelt on the cold ground, not caring about my clothes, and began to prune the dead wood. The thorns bit into my gloves, but the work felt good, purposeful, real. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. Miranda Frost's name appeared on the screen. Good morning, Elena, she said when I answered. I have updates. Tell me. Robert's venture capital firm is under federal investigation. The SEC has frozen his accounts. 3 of his major investors have filed civil suits for fraud. Gregory Pike has been disbarred and is facing criminal charges for his role in the embezzlement scheme. I continued pruning, the scissors making clean cuts through dead branches. And Vanessa? Her work visa was sponsored by Robert's company. With the firm under investigation, her visa status is in jeopardy. Immigration is reviewing her case. She's likely to be deported within 60 days. I see. There's more, Miranda continued. Marcus Ashford contacted my office yesterday. He's requesting a meeting with you. I paused, a thorned branch in my hand. Marcus. Robert's older brother, the one who'd helped falsify documents, who'd erased my contributions to the company, who'd stood by and watched his brother treat me like furniture for 35 years. What does he want? He says he wants to apologize. He's prepared to testify against Robert if the case goes to trial. He claims he didn't know the full extent of Robert's plans. I thought about that, about complicity, about the difference between active cruelty and passive enabling. Tell Marcus I'll consider meeting with him, I said finally. But not yet. I need time. Understood. One last thing. Robert tried to access the house last night. The security system flagged him. Police escorted him away. He's not doing well, Elena. I thought you should know. I looked up at the brownstone, at the windows of the bedroom where I'd slept alone for so many years, at the 4th-floor study where my father's books still lined the shelves. Thank you for telling me, Miranda, I said. But Robert's well-being is no longer my concern. After we hung up, I returned to the roses. The dead wood fell away, revealing green stems underneath, still alive, still capable of growth. 3 months later, I stood in the front parlor of the brownstone and watched as the sign was installed above the door. Castellano House. Cultural Center and Women's Resource Foundation. Luz stood beside me, tears streaming down her face. Your mother would be so proud, Senora. I hope so, I said softly. The transformation had taken time, I'd hired contractors to convert the upper floors into classroom spaces, a library, and offices for legal aid services. The first floor remained largely as it was: the parlor, the dining room, my father's study. But now these rooms would host gatherings, workshops, cultural exchanges. The mission was simple: provide resources for women navigating divorce, financial abuse, and family manipulation. Offer language classes, Japanese, Spanish, Mandarin, to help women access opportunities. Create a community where silence was a choice, not a cage. Miranda Frost had agreed to donate legal hours through her firm. Dr. Rachel Huang would teach financial literacy workshops. James Corwin, the private investigator, volunteered to help women document abuse and gather evidence safely. And I would teach Japanese. The first class was scheduled for this afternoon. 12 women had registered, ranging in age from 30 to 75. Some were divorcing, some were widows navigating estates, some were simply curious, wanting to learn something their husbands had told them they were too old or too stupid to understand. I prepared the classroom on the second floor, the room that had once been Robert's home office, the room where he'd made calls to Vanessa while I was downstairs making dinner. Now it held low tables, cushions, and a whiteboard with hiragana characters written in careful rows. The doorbell rang at precisely 2 p.m. The women arrived one by one. They introduced themselves quietly, taking seats, their faces showing varying degrees of nervousness and hope. The last to arrive was a young woman, mid-30s, with tired eyes and a designer handbag that looked out of place with her worn jeans. "I'm sorry I'm late," she said. I'm Melissa Ashford." I froze. The room went silent. "Ashford?" one of the other women whispered. Melissa's eyes filled with tears. "Marcus Ashford is my father. Robert is my uncle. I was at the restaurant that night. I saw what happened. I heard what my uncle said to you." She swallowed hard. "My father told me what he did, how he helped Robert erase your contributions. I'm so sorry. I know I have no right to be here, but I want to learn. I want to be different than the men in my family." I studied her for a long moment. She was young, scared, complicit by association, but not by action. "Sit down, Melissa," I said quietly. She took a seat, her hands shaking. I turned to the class. "Welcome to Castellano House. My name is Elena, and I will be your instructor. Before we begin, I want to tell you something important. Language is power. Knowledge is power. And silence, strategic, intentional silence, can be the most powerful weapon you possess." I picked up a piece of chalk and began writing on the board. "We will start with basic greetings, but we will also learn business Japanese, legal terminology, and how to advocate for yourselves in situations where others expect you to stay quiet." For the next 2 hours, we learned, we practiced, we stumbled over pronunciations and laughed at mistakes, and slowly, tentatively, began to build something new. After class, Melissa approached me hesitantly. "Mrs. Ashford, Ms. Castellano, Elena is fine. Elena, thank you for letting me stay. I know I don't deserve—" "You're not responsible for your father's choices," I said, "or your uncle's. But you are responsible for your own. What will you do with what you learn here?" She squared her shoulders. "I'm studying law. I want to specialize in elder abuse cases. I want to help people like you, people who were taken advantage of by family members." I nodded slowly. "Then work hard. And when you're ready, come back here and teach a class on legal advocacy." Her eyes widened. "Really? Really? But Melissa," I met her gaze directly, "if you come back, it will be because you've earned it through your own merit, not because of your last name. Understood?" "Understood," she said, her voice firm. That evening, I sat in my mother's garden. The roses were beginning to show new growth. I'd planted additional varieties, hardy climbers that would cover the brick wall by summer. At the center of the garden, I'd installed a small bronze plaque in memory of Catherine Castellano, 1942-2001. "Strength is not the absence of pain, but the refusal to let pain make you small. A letter had arrived that morning. I'd recognized Robert's handwriting on the envelope, still arrogant, still commanding, even in desperation. I hadn't opened it. Instead, I'd placed it in a box in my father's study, along with all the other documents from that chapter of my life. The divorce papers, finalized 6 weeks ago, the restraining order, the court transcripts from the SEC investigation. Evidence of a life I'd survived and moved beyond. Robert had lost everything. His firm was bankrupt. His reputation destroyed. His social circle had evaporated. Gregory Pike was facing 3 years in federal prison. Vanessa had been deported to Taiwan. Her dreams of a Manhattan life dissolved like smoke. And Marcus had sent flowers last week, along with a handwritten note. Elena, I cannot undo what I've done, but I am committed to doing better. I've resigned from Robert's company and am cooperating fully with the investigation. If you'll allow it, I would like to contribute to Castellano House financially. Not as penance, but as a first step toward accountability. Marcus. I'd accepted the donation, and I'd sent a response. Marcus, I appreciate your willingness to take responsibility. When you're ready, we can speak. But know this. Rebuilding trust takes time. I will judge you by your actions, not your words. Elena. Now, sitting in the garden as the sun set over Manhattan, I thought about my mother, about my father, about the decades I'd spent making myself smaller to fit into someone else's vision of who I should be. Never again. My phone buzzed, a text from Miranda. The SEC trial date is set for March. They'll need you to testify. Are you ready? I typed back, I'm ready. I stood, brushing dirt from my knees, and looked up at the brownstone. Lights glowed in the windows. Luce preparing dinner in the kitchen, students gathered in the library on the second floor, life flowing through rooms that had been silent for too long. This house had watched me shrink. Now it would watch me grow, and somewhere, in the language of gardens and seasons and roots that ran deeper than anyone could see, my mother's roses prepared to bloom again. I turned my face to the sky and whispered the words she'd taught me so long ago, the words I'd finally learned to believe. Strength is not the absence of pain. It's the refusal to let pain make you small. I walked back inside, closing the garden door behind me. The silence that followed was not emptiness. It was peace. They say revenge is a dish best served cold. But I learned something different that night at Tsukiji Omakase. Revenge isn't about destruction, it's about reclamation. Robert thought my silence was weakness. He mistook observation for ignorance. He believed that because I didn't scream, I didn't feel. Because I didn't fight, I had surrendered. He was wrong. My mother once told me, never underestimate a woman's silence. Sometimes she's just waiting for you to say enough to destroy yourself. Robert destroyed himself. I simply held up the mirror. Today, Castellano House serves over 200 women a year. We teach languages, provide legal aid, offer financial counseling, and create community for those who've been made to feel invisible. Marcus did eventually meet with me. He funds a scholarship program for women studying law. He's estranged from Robert. He's trying. Robert writes letters occasionally. I don't open them. And me? I teach Japanese every Tuesday and Thursday. I tend my mother's roses. I sleep soundly in the house my father built. I am 60 years old, and I am finally, truly free. So here's what I learned. Never let anyone convince you that silence means acceptance. Never let them mistake grace for weakness. And never, ever underestimate a woman who has decided she's had enough. Because when she finally speaks, the world will listen.